and eventually I ended up in the main focus in rehabilitation. So therefore, if I kind of give myself a praise, I'll call myself a polymath in that sense. But on the other hand, one can also say it's a jack of all trades, right? And hopefully master of some. So, and that also defines the fact that I have a relatively specific language and a relatively specific kind of turn and twist on the things, and kind of in an interesting turn of events, since I started studying cybernetics like 35 years ago, right? And cybernetics is the original cyber, right? So you see, because that's a kind of the study which preceded the computer science. So then, as things are changing now with more and more of this kind of AI conversation, I kind of find myself in a relatively interesting position that at least I have some benefits out of my first backgrounds, and people don't need to be, you know, kind of confused by the fact that, okay, so how is that cybernetics related to the movement therapies or the hands-on body work and all these things. So, and of course, it's a lot of the way I see it, it's really plenty of new opportunities which we get through this new language that is happening. And well, I will try today to flip it in such ways that are going to be kind of hopefully intriguing and interesting, and kind of move on and try to show you like what are the new opportunities and the new interesting kind of ideas and so on which are happening in the background. And at the same time, hopefully it's going to help you to kind of see your own profession, experience, and expertise in a new and I would say better way, kind of to see the new opportunities. So that's probably the introduction. Now, and before we move on, right, so you see my main method is actually screen sharing, where I have a bunch of interesting pictures, and like also we happily fortunately have Google to help us, so that we can always find something and see what's the current kind of body of knowledge on a particular field. And whilst the PowerPoint presentations are not my strongest side, and I actually didn't have much time to prepare it. So I guess with this, let's move on, right? So it's Sunday evening. Let's move on. So I have the screen sharing rights, which is good. So let's start with the screen sharing, and that's not the right thing that I actually brought in. Wait, where is that? Okay, something like this. Tick, screen share. Screen share. Okay, so now, actually, after flipping different subjects and so on, I think that the main conversation that we're going to have today, since you're the practitioners, is going to go around the lines of what could be seen as the fascia health farming. So, and yes, I started the promo with the conversation about the AI as anatomical intelligence, and we will kind of flip to this a bit later. So what actually the current AI, which is the so-called artificial intelligence, is, what we need to extract from it. But our main subject is going to be about the fascia health farms, where we would go and discuss the conversation, which could go from how we actually sitting on the verge of transition from what typically has been the functional harvesting and the maybe structural repairs. So how we can move towards the fascia health farming and actually seeing those fascia health farms throughout the body. Now, I mean, let me do the following. See, actually, this is one of my favorite slides, or the favorite pictures altogether, and it's going to be serving as a kind of inspiration for us. It's a relatively recent publication from one of the agricultural journals, and it actually gives you a very interesting perspective, right? Is that if historically nature optimizes the roots and this kind of the multi-scale transitions which happens in the background, agriculture has been optimizing what comes on top, so basically optimizing the crops, whilst at the same time the nature in that sense has this perennial self-renewing capacity, whilst agriculture needs fertilizers, it's annual, and so on and so forth. So this is going to be kind of an inspiration. But now let's move right away into something very tangible, and so that we will ask ourselves few practical questions. So, like to give you the illustration of the health farms. So I'm starting here with rather unexpected thing, which is what baby feet, right? So I've kind of just typed baby's foot and legs, and I've got this whole bunch of pictures. Now, what would be the first message here is actually the babies are our great first entry and the first kind of insight into the fascia health farms. How does that look? Let's kind of look at this in a more traditional way. So you see, when we are discussing the performances later, performances throughout the lifetime, and speaking of walking and all these other things, oops. So we draw these pictures of the legs, we put those people on their feet, we discuss the vertical positions, we discuss the lift-offs, and kind of all this type of things very, very enthusiastically. And of course, we pay a lot of attention to the famous and big muscle groups, particularly including the ones like the gastrocnemius, soleus, and so on. But if we look back here into the prior history, what do we have? The interesting thing, if you start looking at babies, what are you going to observe? You're going to observe an interesting thing. You're going to observe that actually the child has extremely active toes, and an interesting point, and I will actually use the drawing here. An interesting point is that the strongest element that the healthy child has would be this entire anterior surface. Now, what does that mean? If we start looking into it, what we are observing, the child has an extremely active toes, has very strong anterior surface, which then goes all the way to the activation of the knee. And interestingly enough, the same child, when the newborn, has very, 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 very tiny and weak gastrocnemius. If you look at the healthy baby, you'll see this is very, like there's very little muscle there. So the muscle is a functional organ that you will need later for the push, for the lift off, and all the other things. In the beginning, it's actually not much of it there, but the front is very, very present. So what's our first take on this? This is actually a great illustration of the fascia health farm. How does that work? So we'll ask ourselves the next question and type it in: membrane between tibia and fibula. Click on that, look at the images, and let's find something nice over here. So here, for example, it's a nice one, tells us about the interosseous membrane of the right leg. Not bad, that's a pretty good image. If we keep going further, well, we can also find here the cross section, and this cross section is going to show that yes, for the healthy grown-up person, you see the cross section of the calf looks a lot larger than the cross section on the front. And if we start looking at this, what we are also understanding that the anterior and the posterior muscles, they are sharing the same membrane in between. Now, look at, like, see how the thing works if we talk about the fascia health farms. So what happens? We have, where is that picture? Yeah, we have a baby who initially starts with the activity of the toes, which goes continuously in the background. This activity of the toes goes and powers the anterior surface, which actually has massive fat presence. And thanks to this activity, what do we have? We have the capacity to feed into the development of the interosseous membrane, which to begin with is not particularly strong. And then what are we having? We're having the next interesting thing. Once the interosseous membrane develops sufficiently and the interosseous membrane is shared by the anterior and by the posterior muscles, now by the time the baby is going to move into the walking phase, when he would really need this gastrocnemius as the organ of functional harvesting, right? And that's where the conversation about the functional harvesting comes in. Yes, you need it for the walking. Yes, you need it for the push. Yes, you need the gastrocnemius and then the Achilles tendon to do this kind of kangaroo job of providing you with the jump capacity and so on. But in order to contain this massive functional organ, you need to have a whole farm around it, which is going to contain it on the front, on the top, on the bottom, and then its activity would be distributed throughout. And we see two processes here. On the one hand, it's this initial enablement was there to provide the proper capacity for that activity. On the other hand, later, the activity of the gastrocnemius is going to feed back into the same membrane and actually supply, you know, the proper development, the transitions, transformations, and so on of all these tibialis muscles and all these other things. So that's kind of a first insight into this. So the idea is that there is an enablement process, and, you know, because you see, the important point is that even if we look at the muscles, what do we have? We have the official list. The official list of the muscles is something like 650 muscles. But if you ask yourself a question, how many muscles do you actually know, or how many muscles you can actively work with or kind of actively appeal to if we look at them as organs? And in fact, the total number of this kind of trainable muscles, which we all know, right? Gastrocnemius, hamstrings, paravertebrals, biceps, triceps, and all this. So if we take the total list is going to be like 40, maximum 50 muscles. So the remaining 600 muscles, they are not particularly individual because they are very short, just a few centimeters. They're very membranous, so they don't have much of the actual muscle bulk. They have very strange and distributed attachments and so on, and they work in a distributed fashion. They work collectively rather than individually. So that's a first kind of initial insight. And this is where you might ask me a question, okay, but where does the fascia science kind of come into this in the first place? My answer would be this. See, this is a wonderful picture. A wonderful picture which is being, around for last, whatever, 10, 15 years already. And what is the first thing that we get out of the fascia science? Out of the fascia science, the first thing that we have to take on board is this, that everyone, it's like democracy, from autocracy of the muscles, we move into democracy. If before it was all just about the muscles, the only thing that mattered, if you look at the physiology textbooks and so on, is the muscle. Why? Because the muscle has contractile capacity. It has it's electrically active and readily measurable, and so on and so forth. So therefore, it's an easy target for the functional extraction, functional harvesting. It's the one which we actually use for the external activities. What did we get through the fascia thing? We got this democracy and saying, hey, by the way, these guys, whether it's the fat, whether it's the skin, whether it's the deep fascia, or whether it's the periosteum of the bone, by the way, everyone has equal fascia rights, and they're made out of the same fundamental background stuff. That's a big change. Now, you might ask me the question, okay, but how we're going to address the fat or the deep fascia in that sense? That's the second question. But in first point, this is what we have to understand. We actually have the democracy that everyone now, at least potentially, has equal rights. The fascia throughout has equal rights. But then came another great man, Dr. Gumberto, and he came up with his strolling under the skin series, right? And then if we start looking at strolling under the skin videos, what we're going to see, we're seeing, there is a lot of activities which are happening there, appearing and disappearing. We will discard now the fact that it's kind of being artificially kind of entered through, but it's alive. And this is one of my favorite episodes here, which is really important to understand. He hired those people to do the drawings, and this is just a really dramatic representation. Because what you're seeing here, right? You're seeing here the representation of a singular, say, muscular fiber, right? Which is then surrounded by the mesh and the embed of thousands of their fascia fibers. So we'll simplify it as the kind of general interstitial, gels and the collagen there. But what I want you to see here, I want you to see this thing. Like, if you look at that, I hope you realize that this muscle fiber, right, is a freaking monster. It's a powerhouse. It's a monstrosity compared to its neighbors. So it has huge, absolutely huge capacity, which need to be contained in order to extract anything useful out of it. This is a really, really important thing, because you know what? This is the part where I'm sad that I don't have the ability to kind of now show up on the screen. But this is an incredible thing. You know, we say it so easily. Oh, the muscle contracts, and then you know, like I use my biceps to do this. It's okay. Like, but if you were designing a system for controllable delivery of the movement, ask yourself a question. Would you choose a muscle? A muscle fiber, comparing to its neighbors, is an absolute monster that has a capacity for extremely powerful immediate contraction, who can kind of tear everything apart. And then the question is, how is it going to go from one single contraction? How is it going to come back? You know, what's going to make sure that it comes back to the same length and so on? Say neural signal, but the neural signals are too slow. So it's important to understand that in order to make sense out of muscular activity, we need to have this ratio of one fiber, one muscle fiber, to thousands of this nameless fascia fibers, which are actually providing the attachments, providing the stability. So this is what I call in the sort of this language. Where is that? Yes. This is what I call, wait a second. Yes. This is what I call the control sandwich. See, if you think about the control sandwich, you have a monster. And again, you should never think of
Eu adorava que assim fosse, mas.
Oh,
Mas aqui, depois vamos.
what's happening?
Está bem?
Is it right? Okay, just so you should never think of a single muscle of anything like a monster. Muscle is a monster. And you see, also, besides of this monster is also having other problems, because a muscle also picks up all kind of garbage, right? Because basically it's because of its electrical sensitivity. You think about something mechanically unrelated, bam, your muscle tone goes up. You feel something, bam, your muscle tone goes up. You haven't you're eaten something wrong and you kind of don't feel viscerally comfortable, bam, your muscle tone changes. Like, what? And you want this to be your controller? I mean, it makes zero sense. So what you need to have the multiple containments, attachments to the skin, because the skin is immovable. And then on the other side, you want to have the periosteum, because the periosteum is immovable. And then now you have something which is reasonably controllable. So you have the relationship 1 to thousands, and you have the constraint on one side, you have constraint on the other side, and this is how this monster could be contained and could be converted into useful external activity. Now, this is a good way of looking into say, hey, what we are having here, this is exactly the two things that we are discussing. Now, this muscular usage, main muscular usage that everyone typically thinks about, this is the performance harvesting, right? So you want to harvest the performance from the muscle. Harvesting, but in order for us to be able to harvest this performance, what do we need? We need this health farm around it, which is going to provide the sufficient enablement in all kinds of ways. It's going to provide the enablement mechanically, it's going to provide the enablement metabolically, and so on and so forth. But fortunately, on the other hand, so that's kind of the output part, but on the input part, the muscle gives back, because as the muscle has the capacity to react to the external inputs, what does it do? It pays back. It actually feeds the tension back into the system, creating the ability to motivate the fibroblasts and kind of get through this fibroblast tensional network. So this way it contributes towards their health farm. But this is, a scale which is very helpful to understand that we have these relationships, which is a monoscale externally optimized, and externally optimized for the meters per second. This is where we are externally. This is where we are externally with the meters per second. But internally, life goes at completely different scales, right? So you see, when we talk about these guys, this is where these guys, they live in a completely different world. They live in the world of the micrometers per microseconds. So their world is completely different. So it's much faster than the world that we live in, for which the muscle connects us to. So that's an example of the enablement. And then if we kind of move back and do our do this thing again. Wait. Stop sharing. Wait a second. Change this. Yes. And go here again. You see, now we look here at the example. NHS shows us what? A club foot. A club foot is a problem, right? Now, which requires some kind of retraining or some kind of structural correction or something else. But now, once we understood the perspective of the health farm, what do we see here? We see here deficit of the health farms, right? A club foot person is the person who doesn't have much on the dorsal side. Therefore, that's one version, right? And the other version there is that that side of the gastrocnemius gets activated too early. So therefore, that shared membrane, we talked about the shared membrane, right? So you see the membrane that connects the tibia and fibula, where on one side here you've got everything anterior, and only there you have this posterior connection. There has to be the right timing, and there has to be the right kind of relationship, so that this part would be much stronger in terms of its ability to withstand the displacements, in order to contain the dominance of the contractile monstrosity, the dominance of the gastrocnemius. Because in that case, what happens? Boom, the circulation gets locked. And the next thing, you get the derailment of the heel bone. So that's really a very simple perspective when we start discussing the idea of the health farm. What would be our reasoning in this scenario? Our reasoning in this scenario would be, okay, of course, this is a child who has an extreme trouble, but we can visualize this in all sorts of other dimensions. And if we move, for example, towards from the foot, if we move towards the torso, then we're going to have another set of logic, right? So here we look at this and say, let's look at the vertebral column. Vertebral column. I don't want to resume my journey. Where is that? Oh, okay, vertebral column. So no matter how we try very hard, right? We all try very hard, and particularly we try hard in the community of the biotensegrity community. We try very hard to get people out of this idea of the vertebral column. But here you've got the axial skeleton and all these conversations. Now, if we start thinking in terms of the health farms and enablements, then we ask ourselves the next set of questions. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at this, right? So what do we have here? These are the vertebral bodies. Why do we think that the bodies are so important? Because we believe in the fact that they are kind of stacked one on top of another. But if we ask ourselves a different question, the same, but what's the most intense type of the impact that we are dealing with? What's the fundamental thing that we deal with when we are discussing biomechanics? And of course, the word would be torque, right? Everything angular, not to mention angular and frictionless, is experiencing torque. So if we think about this, we say, I even have somewhere here, value function, torque. Bam, is a measure of the force that can cause an object to rotate about an axis, which is a question there, but it's an angular force. And then what will be the practical representation of it? Torsion. Then we ask ourselves a question. Let's look back at this thing. Vertebral column. The actual spinals, the actual vertebral bodies. How good would they be in terms of dealing with torsion? And the answer is terrible. Completely helpless. So the question is, who is going to help them to deal with torsion, right? And there's a brilliant video, which is called Understanding Torsion, which I obviously recommend everybody to see. You see, that shows you that if you got different types of material, it either, so once you start applying torsion, it cuts through, it gets distorted. And what is the most important thing? It actually gets in trouble. It gets in trouble in the middle. So what's the most important conclusion there? The most important conclusion is this, that to deal with torsion, you need the strong perimeter. Perimeter, that's represented by whom? That's represented by the spinal processes. So suddenly, if we start thinking this way, say, actually, if we want to contain torsion, well, then we need to control the perimeter. And if we control the perimeter, the vertebral bodies are absolutely terrible for that job. So, if anything, the best candidates that we have for this would be the spinal processes. So the spinal processes suddenly become the leaders, and they give us the idea that in the respect to the actual vertebral bodies, they would perform as that health farm. And if you look kind of from this perspective, you might say that they are, where's the fish? What's the fish? Torsion. Okay, fish. It looks more like a fish fin. Yeah, fish fin. You see, if you, if you start thinking of it as the fish fin, which prevents the torsion, then you get a completely different perspective. So my point is this, is that this is the logic through which we can approach pretty much everything. And in that sense, that what brings us into the idea of the enablements and the discussion about the fascia health farms. So that's audio is unstable. Okay. So that's a first kind of introduction there, right? Is that the idea is this. If I start resharing my thing here, so the logic is very simple. Every organ without exception, every functional organs needs a supporting health farm in the background, which is going to be multi-scale. So that's really the key thing to understand, how to travel between the scales, right? And this is one of the trickiest parts. You know, to tell you the truth, this took me like almost forever to get through and to understand and kind of find the right type of the representation. Because you see, if I type the multi-scale, right? I type multi-scale into Google, ta-dam, there is no shortage of multi-scale conversation, right? So I hope that multiple scales, this is understandable, right? But maybe let me just get this a bit clearer. Let me change to this, Oops. Yes. So multi-scale, that's one of the key words that we are going to, that I want you to keep in mind. And multi-scale, in fact, if we put it this way, the whole thing about fascia, why is that important? Why I use the term fascia health farm? Because fascia is the medium of the multi-scale transitions in the body. That's it. You know, because of course there is this debate. Was fascia disregarded or was fascia regarded? Did people know about fascia or didn't they, or they didn't know? Fact is, anything that we knew about fascia before is semi-useless type of outdated stuff. because before this type of modeling, as the one like Gumberto does, before that type of modeling appeared, we had no idea what would be the use of it. You know, before before the computers, before the computer imaging and so on, we didn't have the access to the multi-scale understanding. So we really have to appreciate the power of our times, right? And that's a very strange thing, because you see, we all kind of have a, you know, on the one hand, we look at the world around us, right? And I see that among you, there are no youngsters there, right? But like, meaning, I look back on the world of my childhood in the Soviet Union, fundamentally, okay, disregard the computers and so on, but fundamentally things were the same. If you ask yourself a question, were there any major breakthroughs made since 1970s until now, which would be kind of within the mainstream science? The answer is no. There is nothing really. There has been endless promises. We're going to do this, this, and this, and this, and this. But you know, that's why I kind of invite all of you to watch my interviews with Steve, because Steve is a time capsule person. So he is, you know, think about it. He went to medical school in 1951. So he actually was a live witness to the introduction of antibiotics, to the transformation of medicine, to the miracles experienced there, to the X-rays, to the MRIs, to the, you know, laboratories, and all these other things. So the previous 50 years, 1920s to 1970s, were miraculous. The 50 years before that, 1870s to 1920s, were miraculous and transformational in terms of the engineering and so on. And 1920s to 1970s was transformational in terms of the life sciences. But 1970s to 2020s, the number of so-called scientists went up tenfold, if not hundredfold, but in a number of articles and so on. But the world hasn't changed seemingly. But what I'm trying to say is that in the background, these transformations are brewing, right? We're still living with the same dinosaur concepts, which are like in their roots would be at least 500 years old, you know, if we kind of count back to Vesalius, which is 1543. But these are the key transformations. And the conversation about fascia is less this conversation, right? Although it's very important, but throughout this, you know, ubiquity of fascia, fascia is a shorthand word for this multi-scale access, the multi-scale access, the multi-scale travel. But the multi-scale travel, which these people are doing, their multi-scale travel comes the other way around, right? So you see, they are DNA, RNA, protein, and so on. They are biochemical fans. And they try to bring it all the way here, whilst you and me, as practitioners, we are, where we are? Where are we? Ah, we're not sharing this part. No.
Leonid, can I just say something?
Yes, please.
The conversations with Stephen Levin that Leonid has just talked about, they are on the Biotensegrity archive that I placed as a link in the chat in the YouTube channel of the archival that is there. Okay. Just a
Thank you.
reminder. Welcome.
Yes. So you see here, this is what I'm trying to draw, right? So you guys and me, we are here. Phenotype. This is what we are. But we are not all that, because this is all physics. That's trying to make it inanimate. We are here experiential. What is your greatest achievement? We work with live people at real time. And we have the real interfaces. So we get the true 3D perception of people in real time. And that means that for us, all that stuff is not what we are actually looking at. But this is the scale. Let's move a bit and get what we are interested in. We are interested in this. So first point, fascia as the multi-scale thing. Now, let's make a little bit of simple school things, because I find that they might be very simple, but just I hope that you're not going to be offended. So for their simplicity, but it's helpful to rerun them. So what's the key thing we need to understand? External world, external world, external performance, performance. The so-called movement and other forms of our expression and so on. What is the scale at which it happens? The human scale, meters per second. That's where we are as individuals, as personalities. That's what we register. We register meters and sort of some fractions of meters, like big centimeters, and we register seconds. If you watch a person moving, he has to like make several steps and in order to see the certain pattern, right? So he covered several meters and walked for several seconds. So our performance, whether it's eating, whether it's walking, whether it's whatever, any interactions with the external world, meters per second. Then, if we go further, when we move to their interaction that our bodies have with the world, the bodies, that's mechanical interfaces of millimeters per milliseconds. After that, you've got micrometers per microseconds. And then there would be nanometers per nanoseconds. So let me put this into perspective. This is, if this is 1 meter, 1 second, right? What is a millimeter? This is 1 thousandths, right? And the millisecond is 1 thousandth of a second. So what is the proportion between millimeters per second and millimeters per millisecond, right? 1 thousandth times 1 thousandth equals 1 millionth, right? So if we start moving here, we of course, this is 1 millionth times 1 millionth. Well, this is 1 to the power 10 minus 12. Meaning, once you move to the level of millimeters per milliseconds, that's 1,000 times billion. So my point is to help you to understand that in reality, the world inside us is huge. And what has been done what is a trick that the science has done because of its origins in the physics and inanimate world? What did they do? They did this. They just chopped it like that. So they cut away the time from the space. And all these graphs that you see here, these types of graphs, see, these types of graphs, they are coming through this. So as if you can travel from phenotype to DNA, and DNA, of course, that's nanometers, right? So you see, this is nanometers, this is micrometers. So this is 10 minus 9, 1 billionth, and this is 10 minus 6, 1 million. So, but the trick that they do, they operate the nanoseconds and nano and microseconds, they kind of don't put them into account. So basically, as if we can still have seconds which are external, the body doesn't live in seconds, and then connected to those scales. That's the main trick that kind of makes the whole thing flip. So what happened as a result? As a result, we are in a scenario where our real interaction with the world is millimeters per milliseconds. This is how we really interact with the world. When you step on the ground, you are facing the millimeters as the force concentrations per milliseconds. That's the reality of the interactions that you have. And without that, you see, for one kind of second of the interaction, it multiplies to the point of millions, even at the tangible level of millimeters per milliseconds. And this is what has been skipped. Why? Because in standard inanimate world, you can skip the millimeters. Inanimate, right? So what is the greatest bonus that we got via engineering? The greatest bonus that we got via engineering is crystals. Metals are crystals. So therefore, you can go from external meters directly to the crystal structure of the metal, which belongs to the micrometers. And you can skip the microseconds. So it's so, in that sense, when it comes to the inanimate objects, you can divide the microseconds from the micrometers. And as a result, you end up in a very neat and convenient world where, you just have it like this. And this is really this is the key point, that once we open this up, then we really get it into a very straightforward thing. We get back to from this multi-scale, see, then comes all this conversation, multi-scale modeling, machine learning, and so on and so on. But what you're going to read about this stuff. They think that they can actually model DNAs and all these other things and so on, which is, completely unrealistic. Because if you start looking at it, they talk about junk DNA, right? Junk DNA making like 98% of it. But why? Because this factory-like anatomy that we have and that we all know, that factory anatomy excludes those multi-scale transitions. And that's what is interesting. And that is what is practical. So on a practical level, what is happening? That you, as a practitioner, you get the access to the multi-scale anatomy which spreads there. So what is the thing, right? So you see, what is the key kind of benefit that and the key world that you live in, right? You know, you're all conditioned with the ideas that, okay, what are we doing? We are doing some training. Or we do, if you are a practitioner of, in body work, right? In body work, you are being told that you are doing the structural repairs of sorts. And in movement therapies and training, movement therapies, you are doing some kind of training. And it would be coordination and so on and so on and so forth. But the fact is, if you look at what you are doing in any kind of immediate observational sense, you'll see that all of you guys, whether you're coming from the Pilates field, whether you're coming from yoga, whether you're coming from Tai Chi and so on. So this type of the techniques, all of them, they're based on a certain positions, which then involve installation of the constraints. You slow things down, right? And then after that, you create, you pay attention to details, and then what you start doing, you start stacking the tensions. You feel this has changed, this has moved, I add this to this, and then after adding this to this and so on. So you get the entry to their cascades. That's your greatest part. In fact, you are working in the cascades whilst keeping the tension stack. Because the moment you get away from that tension stack, restart the movement and so on, it's all gone. So my point, if you wish, there is to bring this kind of extended realization and say, ladies and gentlemen, in fact, what is the great change that our new times is bringing is the AI. Why AI is so important? Because this is finally kind of from years of these transformations and so on, and the computer evolution and so on, we came to a logical, to a pinnacle there. Because AI is accepting the fact that you have hidden layers. They're meaning that there is a vast unknown, and you can work with this vast unknown without making it known. That's a huge thing. You kind of have the hidden layers and you have the open layers, which give you that value, open layers. That's the value function. This is the functional harvesting. And what is that? In our terms, that will be the fascia health farms. The multi-scale fascia health farms. Monoscale harvesting, multi-scale health farms. So don't get confused. I'll give you some references. Let me do this. See, I have a secret source for you. This is the guy who is an absolute genius in presentations. So it's called the 3 blue, 1 brown. That's the chap who teaches mathematics and calculus. His explanations are remarkable, like the best, for the starter, right? And this is what you see here as the examples of those hidden layers in those networks. And then the second part 2 of this, it's a discussion of this gradient descent. So actually the optimization that goes into the unknown.
Leonid, you're not sharing anything. I
Oh,
don't know
shit.
if
Okay, sorry. That wasn't the intention. Yes, so that's video number 1. So you see, called 3 blue and 1 brown. It has more than 5 million subscribers, right? But this guy is amazing in terms of the explanations, and his series on the neural networks. You definitely have to watch, because the problem is that the language there is incredibly bad, and also you have to realize that this whole thing, which we now call AI, went through periods of so-called AI winters, and that AI winter actually lasted very long. So the AI spring started in 2012. So basically, you see, as I'm saying, we are witnessing these transformations. So the recovery of this type of reasoning came in 2012, and now we're in 2023. So it's sort of finally, it kind of had a lift off. Before it didn't. So, but this, when you hear all these words, neural network, loss function, and so on, they're so convoluted and they're misleading you completely. So the better thing is to think about it this way. You think about that you are on the surface, you are observing the visible part, which goes down to the level of the millimeters, but life internally happens inside those hidden layers, which work at those micrometers per microseconds and nanometers and nanoseconds. So in other words, like our lifetime, right, as persons and as external functions, compared to the internal life in our bodies, is like solar system in respect to us. It's, when in 1 second of our lifetime, there is, a billion of billions events which is happening internally. It's like uncountable numbers. So therefore, what we need to do is just a very simple thing. We have the relationship between the external and the internal. And you historically have kind of been already doing this through different forms of tensional stacking. But the fact is that those anatomical maps on which you've been learning, those anatomical maps, they are all servicing the idea of the machine. And let me just give you this example. You see, because if you start looking at the real life feet and so on, and start kind of asking the question, how does that actually work? What kind of relationships are there, and so on and so forth? You start seeing, you start asking yourself a questions. Those baby folds, where did they go? Like, you don't see them, but are they still operational? What would they mean? How these relationships are happening? And then you start seeing world in a different light. And for example, this is a picture that you typically look at, and there would be a conversation. Okay, that's a foot arch. This is what you do through the walk. And there would be people talking about, do we need to start with, our running with the toes, or do we need to start it with the heel, and so on and so on. And then suddenly, accidentally, in an atlas, you find something like this. You find this picture. And you say, holy crap. This is a completely different perspective, right? Because if you look at it like this, what do you realize? You realize that actually nothing prevents you from looking at the foot as the knee, right? So the heel becomes the ankle cap. So you see, this is, if that was the back of the knee, right? And that was the patella, this is the ankle cap. And you have the retinaculum and so on to embody. So you see, that's a lot of questions. Once you start seeing the enablements, once you start seeing these health farms, once you start kind of observing things and saying, by the way, it's not all what it looks like. And then, that the typical image that we have, okay, so this is the gastrocnemius, which is doing the primary work, and this is the foot arch, and they are working together. And, the anterior muscles, they're just lifting the toes. There's not much of the practical value in them. But if you start seeing that in order to get any function is always, the functional organs are always embedded into this health farms. And it's these health farms that we actually want to optimize. So the message that I have is actually very, very simple. So what we are facing today? Today we are facing a very simple reality that we live in a very intense world that pushes people into kind of extracting their capacity, and we are being, we are under continuous extraction of all the three of the performance parts, right? So you see the strength or power, effort, and attention. The world continuously tries to squeeze more out of us, convert us into this agriculture, buy more, look at more, do more, sweat more, and so on and so forth. And then once we get rootless, body-wise, right? So you see, eat the pills and the fertilizers, which are going to kind of keep it alive and sustainable and dependent on a certain, external supply. What's our logic? Our logic is very straightforward. We want to enable as much as possible those internal fascia health farms. And it's the discovery of the multi-scale nature of fascia that as a cascade, right? So you see fascia as a cascade, as a multiplier that allows the tension control that you apply at the top and build different algorithms and cascades out of it. These cascades allow you to build and go in and start reclaiming those health farms. Because effectively, what is a very simple logic? The so simple logic is this: any health condition that you have is a health farm deficit. So if you have the trouble with the hamstring, you can try to work on the hamstring, or you can look around and say, well, what's their health farm around the hamstring? And is this health farm working to its best capacity. And then we start looking at things, right? So you see, these are the types of hamstrings that I have to deal with. And of course, it's very easy to say, oh, look at that. This is a terrible hamstring. These are the muscles which have been shortened. This is the signals which are being wrong, and all these other things which are coming through. Is it possible to think like this? Of course it is. But, and in this kind of scenario, what would be the offers? Do the Botox injections, do stretching, and then eventually cut this, hamstring in order to try to make it longer. But then we ask ourselves a question and say, what would be the health farms for this hamstring? What would be the multi-scale transitions around? And then, even we start looking at standard images, say, okay, look, these guys, they actually have the attachments. Are these attachments doing well or not? Are they embedded well enough? Are they passing the impact well enough? And then if you ask yourself the further question, say, by the way, this hamstring thing is actually connecting directly from, the ischial tuberosity all the way to the bottom. And if we ask ourselves the question, is this attachment sitting under the bone or is it sitting over the bone? If it's sitting under the bone, it's one story. If it's sitting over the bone, it's a completely different story. And then you ask ourselves the questions. Again, you go back and say, this is our fascia democracy. Fascia democracy means all layers created equal and having the common denominator there. So therefore, what do we do there? We ask ourselves a question. Well, within that circumference, is there enough connections and the attachments which are coming to the actual femur? If you look at the cross section, right? If you look at the cross section, and we talked about the, the torsion control itself. Well, of course, if there is not enough distribution on the surface, then the question is it going to be enough attachments at the bottom? So is the health farm of the torsion control, is this health farm working well? And if it's not, then you wouldn't be surprised that hamstring is underperforming.
Leonid,
So,
can I, sorry.
Yes.
Can I just, because there is a question that's coming to me as a movement practitioner, and you're talking about the scales, and what we see and what we work with mainly, I believe, is the top scale. As you said, that's what we see.
Wait. Let me get back, right? So you see, yes, of course, but you see, the thing is that this is the point. The thing is that all of you, you have the access, right? So you see, when you connect, right? So you see, all of you are fundamentally not the sweat techniques, right? You're not the sweat extractors. You're not the people who kind of, go for do more sweat, more lift heavier, and so on. You are working, what you're doing, you are organizing people, bring them to certain constraints, right? And after that, operating a certain cascades. So link this to this, connect this to this. Do you feel that? Right? And then you also use the devices and other things in order to put them into a very limited scope where you can actually achieve that potential entry. So what I'm saying is that whether you're a movement practitioner or whether you are a body worker in that sense, fundamentally, you are rooting into the same thing. So universally, what we're talking about, you get the entry. We all exist on the external level, right? So you see, we are not surgeons, right? So you see, we are, that's our key difference. We are not surgeons, we are not microscopists. So we are working at the level of entry into the body. And what is the key characteristic that is the same both for the good practitioners in body work and for the movement practitioners? Cascades. You work in cascades, right? You bring a person in a certain position, then within a certain position, the person has to experience a certain sensation, that tension and whatever distribution. Then on top of this, there is next, on top of it, there is next and next. So you are building the cascades. And if the person has lost their attention or changed their position or kind of just sneezed and so on, you have to restart again. And that's the key word. Stacking the tensions and building the cascades. That's our entry. So you see, in that sense, you can think about it as a sort of, you are branching, right? So you can link wider, closer, you can link through the angular approaches, you can link through the point approaches, you can link through the surface approaches and so on. But the key thing is this: you are stacking, tensional stacking that translates into this health, effectively becomes the health farm's nourishment, if you wish. But my point is that once you realize that, right, so you see, then you can do a lot more, because typically, if you are limited when if you're conditioned to begin with your explanations as a person who, okay, I'm doing the training, what I'm going to do, I'm going to improve the coordination, or I'm going to improve the strength. Well, we want to understand that the fundamental equation, right? So you see, what is the fundamental, even the fundamental equation of training? Fundamental equation of training. Fundamental equation of training. Fundamental equation of training.
Sharing, not yeah.
Sharing, yes. Am I sharing? No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Fundamental, no, it will be in green, right? In green. Fundamental equation of any training. First is difficult, and then it becomes easier, right? Difficult, because in the beginning you only have the meter second entry to functional organs, right? So to organs, to those muscular, the voluntary controlled muscles as organs, and that's out of 640 anatomical muscles. Probably you have those, say, 40 which can go into the musculoskeletal, neuromusculoskeletal complexes, which perform as those functional entries where you can touch the meters per second. And that's why, of course, initially it's difficult. But then, as it's from difficult, it becomes easier. Why it becomes easier? Because then it spreads through the other scales. It's a multi-scale transition. So that's how it works. Why does it work like this? Because we have health farms which are being formed in utero, and as the babies, as children, we develop the health farms which are building up through our growth, and then for the rest of our lives we are actually living off those health farms that we have established as children. So the question is that any training, any activity has this equation. And what is the key trouble of the children that I'm working with, the children I'm working with? The key trouble is that for them it's difficult and remains difficult. It doesn't get easier. and they are lacking this multi-scale transition. So they're lacking, their health farms are so poorly, they are so poorly developed. Now, when we talk about the healthy person, what is the process of aging? What is the process, whatever? Meaning that the health farms that you've been enabled with since your childhood, on the one hand, they are over farmed, there's always an over extraction coming from that fact that we are always being pushed for the effort, for the power, effort, and attention. Then some of those farms developed better, some of them developed worse. And as you grow older, or as you put greater loads or greater demands on yourself, there's the body indicates, hey, it's not enough. I'm not getting enough, like I don't have enough of this kind of health farm performance. So, and why we see the proliferation of the, in the last 20 years, if you look at the number of the Pilates, yoga, and say whatever other mindful techniques practitioners, the number of those practitioners have probably increased tenfold, and their kind of awareness of the public about this mindful practices or mindful movement practices has increased hugely. Why? Because compared to their message that comes from strength training, which is basically telling you keep mining, right? So you see, force yourself into more, sweat into more, get more out of yourself. You, as the techniques, you are actually working at that level more enthusiastically, more specifically, kind of at this transition from difficult to easier. And then you are kind of trying to chunk and build ensembles and so on and so forth. But you're doing so more in a way of kind of being, say, spontaneous, right? So you see, doing this, with your own enthusiasm, rather than being kind of systematically guided through this. So, and my point is to say, if you don't dissociate yourself from the children with disabilities and say, oh, like poor kids and so on, but no, in fact, they are showing us what happens at the extreme cases when the health farms are weak. So, and they allow us to see those hidden babies, hidden kind of fascia health farm properties that we spontaneously and automatically gained as children, and bring the question, what can we do? How we can kind of enable them? And, in that sense, we have just different directions there. So we can have different perspective of seeing the anatomical maps, right? Because, like this simple example, if you are seeing the foot as the knee, it's a completely different perspective, and as a coach, as a person who trains people, you might say, oh, if I were trying to ask these people to put their, arch into the ground before, and now I realize that actually the primary connection of the foot is this diagonal.
You're not showing
I'm not sharing again. Yes.
No. Okay.
I see that because I'm trying to draw and I cannot. So that's no, stop share. Okay, so now I do this. So you see, if you look at the foot and you say, you know what? I want to plant my feet into the ground, and I want to do this, and I want to get the arch, and blah, 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 and so on. Okay? And then you realize that the primary diagonal along which the entire foot is working is actually this. and the foot is a lot more like the knee, being the reverse of the knee. So where the cap is on this side and with the knee, the cap is on the other side, it opens for you the new options and new opportunities for training, right? You can put extra supports. You can ask the people to plant their heel tip in first place. You might think about adding additional kind of installers there. So what do you do in order to control, if the person is collapsing too much in this ankle cleft? So you also can think about the fact that, okay, does this person have enough activity of the toes, and do they have enough of the connections towards the membrane and so on? Like you can have, so in other words, maybe you would integrate some kind of ballerina-like reverse foot grips in your training there. So, it's a lot of different lines of thinking and acting, even as a trainer, and utilizing, all the standard tools that you historically have, like Pilates balls or whatever, like the yoga mats and the rolls and all this other stuff. So you can think of using them in a completely different way if your goal is not to go towards familiar kind of descriptions. Okay, this is the flexor and this is the extensor of the foot and this is the foot arch and this is the Achilles tendon and so on. But if you start looking around how you get the maximum enablement of this health farm, well, it kind of changes the perspective, I believe. So therefore, in that sense, I think it's very practical for you as the practitioners. So it's again, you shouldn't underestimate your own capacity, because you can ask people to get into different entries, and as you can change the entry, then you can change the cascade of the distribution throughout. So I've been going for an hour and a half, and you see, that I can talk and talk and talk and talk. So it's Sunday evening.
Yes,
So
I think it's time for people to say things. They have been saying some things, some comments on the chat, but maybe people want to say them aloud so you can.
well, I mean,
be
again,
a
you see,
little
look,
more interaction.
I'm really happy, right? So you see, okay, I'm really happy to answer some questions, right? So you see, or hear some comments there, but I mean, I understand it's a lot, and it's maybe been a bit hectic and so on, but as a summary, I just want to get this idea that, look, the fascia thing is great. It's absolutely great, because it's finally meaning the democracy of tissues. But once we speak about the democracy of tissues, it flips everything. Democracy means that you're not talking about movement centric perspective before. You're talking about the constraints centric. Movement is being enabled. Degrees of freedom are cheap, constraints are expensive. So, and if you look at yourself, guys, you are working within controlled constraints and using small activations, which you think are small, but they are not small, right? So which are giving you the access into the improvement of the constraints, and all these other things that can come out of this. So, and once we see this idea, so actually it's a very, I'm trying to bring this on the practical side, right? Is that there's a lot of conversation about the self-healing, about this and this and that and that, but the understanding of the fascia health farms as the multi-scale distributive nature that goes from larger scale to the smaller scales and spreads through fascia, through this 3D framework, as this kind of infinite cascade that spreads, right? And why AI is important, because you cannot pinpoint which particular fascia element is doing what, right? It's not about value of fascia in its ubiquity, in its network, framework, spread, not in the which have names, but in the nameless networks which then disappear and spread. And why so-called neural networks are important? Why we finally, like get it? Because before, in the original early science, unless it's labeled, it doesn't exist. And now, hello, welcome to the hidden networks, hidden layers. It's not named, but it's real and it's working. So that's a huge transitions there, right? So you see the infinite nameless one. So you see that's the power, right? And this is where we'll come back to the, to the principles of biointegrity and so on, as the constraints, as the nameless, as a kind of an architecture and the map that these transitions, they have certain rules, right? So you see, it's not just kind of happening arbitrary, but in first place, we need to understand this, that the practical value there is that, yes, there are fascia health farms. We've been enabled with those health farms through our embryo period and through early childhood, and then we exploit those health farms for the rest of our lives. But since we overdrain them, overmine, overexploit, and so on, well, we have to realize that, hey, what we want, if we want the results on a bigger scale, on a longer term, on a more fundamental thing, okay, we have the whole domain of actually using our experience, using our, like whatever, our experience and expertise, I want to say, yes, experience and expertise and our enthusiasm to actually, start deliberately, not accidentally working on the health farms enablements, right? But deliberately getting there. And this is open both for kind of self-work, and that's why, like we talk about you being the people who are, have high self-awareness, right? So that's why it includes the self-work. And also it includes the work, like where you would be guiding the clients and so on. And it could be both the movement practice, right? And also using, particular certain additional devices and interfaces there. And it could be body work as well. So, the point is that we all have been the beneficiaries of this, if you get my main narrative, right? My main narrative is that you thought that you were trainers and the structural repairers. No, you were not. You were accidental health farm feeders. So now we wanted to move from accidental health farm feeders into systematic health farms enablers, discoverers, and so on. And thanks to the fact that children with disabilities show us those ones so, with so much of the magnifying glass, we can learn a lot from that, and yeah, and basically convert it and transform and understand. So that would be kind of the mini summary of this.
Leonid, it's amazing, and there are a lot of questions that come to my mind. I'm sure there are a lot of questions coming to everyone's mind, but one of the main things is about in our practice as movement practitioners, movement teachers. We have a lot of certainties of what does what in the body, and because of what you said and understanding what you said, it's almost impossible to target the nameless in a targeted, precise way, because it's as you said, it's hidden, and we can just guess or facilitate processes, not train anyone in a certain very precise direction. I don't know. It's one of the things that came to me.
Okay, but you see, look, that's a good point, right? Is that, but once again, the understanding of the long tail distributions, the understanding of the fact that we have, we see very, what is again the value of the network, of this new understanding, the new science of the of the networks, is that hidden parts, it's the hidden parts which make them, it's the massive hidden parts and only small visible ones. So what we typically can perceive and so on is normal, that we only perceive very little. But those are both the conduits and the avenues which go both ways, from hidden into open and from open into hidden. So, and in that sense, what my main point is that as practitioners, this is what you're doing, kind of feeling that response, stacking the response, guiding the person into a certain particular position or in a certain kind of, way of doing things, right? So that's exactly the part, because you are controlling the constraints, and those constraints, okay, Pilates, the internal shower. I've never known about this, this expression, but again, like George Pilates lived in the 50s and, and earlier, right? So you see, before those systematic terms existed, so they had to use pictures, right? They had to use analogies. But now from analogies, they move into kind of legit scientific terminology. That's why I'm saying, that's why the whole AI revolution is such a big step, because it allows us to take the imagery and analogies which before were used as a kind of different guidance in different schools. Osteopaths use one set of schools, one set of imagery. I know yoga uses another, Pilates uses another one, but everyone uses some imagery. But now we can kind of take this imagery and say, okay, how we can systematize that imagery, how we can add and kind of maybe transfer that imagery, basically cross-pollinate and get all these connections. So I think it's actually very exciting in that way. And the fact that, if before, I want to get out of, because in your way of how you kind of phrased it, there was a bit of disappointment. Oh, I cannot be super precise. Hey, it's exactly the other way around. You should be happy about it, that you have a certain cloud, you are building a certain constraints, and then the person is going to be different from visit to visit. And within the visit from one phase to another, they're going to be different. And in that sense, that what makes us live and not the machines. But those clouds, we can control those clouds and we can move those clouds. And that's the thing, is to understand that we're actually working with clouds within certain opacity, not within precise, crystals A to B and so on. This is what, that's for engineering, for the machinery, for the machinery.
Yeah,
Yesterday I was walking on the beach and making some mental calculations, So a simple mental calculation, 1 million seconds, how much is that? So 1 million seconds is actually 4 months. So if you think about micrometers per microseconds, so in our second, if there is a clock inside us which is ticking with the setting of 1 millionth of a second, our second externally equals, sorry, the other way around, our second externally equals to 4 months internally, right? Flip it this way, right? So, I keep saying this, guys, anatomical factory model defies our hugeness. We don't realize how freaking huge we are. You know, a 3 meter external 3 meter Nuno has 1 million square meters inside. And then you may imagine those 1 million square meters are divided in 1 billion nanometers, and those 1 billion nanometers are ticking at the clocks, which are striking every 1 billionth of a second. We are astronomically large internally. So what we have externally as our personalities is such a tiny fraction of what our bodies are kind of, you know, the number of events and the things which are happening there. And you see, and that's what is coming as a recognition in so-called science. They're getting frustrated by this, saying, you know what, now we look at the nanometers and we realize that most of the events that are happening there are transient, meaning that we observe things, but what we see through the clock of seconds, actually in the milliseconds or microseconds, there's so many happened, but they disappeared without a trace. They were critical to what happened later, but didn't leave no trace. And but they are all sponsored by pharmaceutical companies, right? So they want put the, you know, they want to put the endoprosthesis there, right? Because, you know, my point is that what is a drug? What is a medication? A medication is an endoprosthesis which works at the micro scale. Because if the drug lives there, if a compound that you send there is going to live for, let's say, 12 hours, and the clock internally, endoprosthesis, right? Not endoprosthesis.
Sorry, endo, meaning external. Sorry.
No, endoprosthesis, you know, the hip replacement on the knee replacement.
Inside, we put it on the inside. Endo is inside, right?
Yes,
Okay,
endoprosthesis,
thank
right?
you. Sorry.
So basically, it's all prosthetics, right? So you see, and my point is this, guys, if you're basically, what is there? Hip prosthetics. Hip prosthetics, it's a meter per second scale, right? Meter second scale for the real hip. So now the medication is a micrometer perspective. It's also prosthesis. They want to do genetic engineering. I'm saying, hey, you know what? This is really, if you are going to, you are having so much trouble putting the prosthetic hip, and then you go 1 billionth of a scale and you're going to put a prosthetic gene. Ridiculous. You know, but you see, the moment you call it instead of fancy genetic engineering, you say, well, I want to do prosthetic genome, suddenly it becomes a lot less attractive, you know? So the same thing, instead of inventing the clever medications, okay, so we're doing prosthetic macromolecules, you know, because one realized that we're not so good in doing prosthetic hips or prosthetic knees. So, well, you know, like doing the prosthetic macromolecules, I mean, you have even less chance, right? And they're doing the prosthetic genes, sorry. So anyway, I digress a bit in, you know, that's in that particular dimension, but that's the point. Scales, right? So you see, as a practitioner, you have to be happy with the fact that you're working in clouds, right? That's okay. You're moving the cloud. And that cloud is actually giving you that transformation. So you're controlling what you're controlling. You're already introducing the constraints there. Susan, you had the raised hand.
Go on, Susan.
Thank you, everyone. So I just want to confirm some stuff, Leonid, to make sure I'm getting it right.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about using more accurate scientific language, right?
Yes.
That we have this new opportunity. You're not talking about, I just want to confirm that scientific language of cadavers, dead bodies, linear science, machine engineering, that's not the language we're talking about. That we're talking about the scientific language that comes with fractal math, that comes with system science, that comes with
Yes.
soft matter science, is a whole different
Yes. But you
set
see what I'm
of
saying, this
language.
and more,
Yeah.
this and more, because basically the main trouble of that science is that they still don't connect the spatial and the time scales.
Okay, so yeah, let me get to that, right? Right, exactly. That's what I mean by like the fractal math and stuff, right? And so actually, and so when you talk about the long tails, I'm seeing the long tails in two different ways, that we're working with this cloud, whether it's physical therapy or movement education or whatever. We're working with these clouds, and the long tail both is something that can go deep into those multi-scale levels that are unnameable, that we cannot see, that we cannot know. And the long tails are also long in terms of time, where there are things that start to happen as a result of the work that that also unknowable and unseeable, and maybe happen over the next 2 weeks. And
That's true. That's true. And
yes,
again, it may be happening in the areas, that's it. So local, regional, and so on. So you can, that's the point. You cannot control exactly where it's going to pop up. So you
okay,
see,
so hold on, my thread will be done soon. So then the clouds actually are a superior way, right? Are a superior understanding that you're working with the cloud you're working with to help you get into the black box and
yes,
trigger the self-repair
exactly.
and such.
So, but you see, a more
Because we
compact,
cannot know. We are very arrogant if we think that at this point in scientific understanding, we can know everything there is to know about the body, self-healing, anything, because of exactly what you're talking about. And
because it's so huge.
because it's unimaginably huge. And
That's
so
it.
success, whether it's with John Barnes' method of myofascial or Tai Chi or anything, success means that we are somehow in a system which is recruiting all of those things that we cannot see, those nameless networks, those that we cannot name, that we cannot see.
But
And
my point is that it's
one more thing. Last comment
yes,
is completely separate. That way we trick people when we use the word hip replacement. Nothing is being replaced. We are substituting in something that can never replace all of those unknown things that the real hip sees and does, all of those unknown multi-scale level
yeah,
fascial continuum things that we don't understand.
yes. But
Thank
you
you.
see, yes, thank you, Susan. But what I'm just trying to say, right, is that there is a simple way to understand it. You see, that's why I wanted to maybe put it as a compact version, right? So you see, like 2015, that book of Cesar Hidalgo, right? So you see why information grows, which I'm kind of asking everyone to read. I have to refine it there, but he had a brilliant explanation there. So if I do this quick sharing here, so I found it there, right? So you see, yes, I'm sharing.
Yes.
Come on. Okay, we'll do this. Pi, the value of pi. And here we are, right? So yes, pi. 31.1592, so 65. This is just how you see, for example, I more or less know it down to here. Like that's, you wake me in the night, I will tell you this. But further, I don't remember it. I mean, there are people, you know, if you remember this, The Life of Pi, about the tiger one, right? So you see how the kid was able to remember it, I don't know, to the whole, you know, blackboard. So these are the numbers which are endless, the relationships which are endless. And he talks about this in a very compact way. It's a very elegant understanding, but it takes a further thing. So you see, originally, everything in science comes from the left side, meaning that originally you kind of throw in and say, what is the relationship between their, you know, between the radius and their perimeter? So, or the square and the circle. And you say, oh, it's approximately 3. And you see, you're quite happy with this 3. Saying, okay, 3, I'm getting close enough, but can I get closer? Say, okay, sure. You know, it's already a good guess, but now we're going to get this guess better, and it's going to be 3.1. Can I get better? 3.14. Can I get better? 3.41 better, and so on, right? And then you keep going there, and in practical engineering terms, you rarely go beyond this. Most of civilization has been built rounding up to the second one, basically rounding up to the fourth. It's enough, right? So you see, okay, so you know, when you do precision engineering, you're rounding up to the microns, which means that you are rounding up here. So this is coming from the left side. And this is fundamentally how the entire science is made. That first you're trying to do a precise guess and then refine it. What he talks about the fact that what is the whole chaos thing is coming from the right side. And the problem is that if you have, and this is the key word, if you have processes which are long running and cyclical, then you are done. No matter how far you chop, this little uncontrolled thing is going to kill you. Meaning, literally going to kill you, because the error is going to accumulate and your system is going to get destroyed very, very quickly. But very quickly, we talk about within thousands, millions, or whatever cycles. But if you need billions of cycles and you're dead at the millionth cycle, it's a quick death. So, and this is really the terminology that you want to see. Traditional science, left-hand science. Why I'm so excited about the whole thing with the gradient descent and about the so-called loss function and about the AI, because this is finally workable right side science. Because for them, this is, you throw yourself in somewhere there, and then you gradually work your way from the right side, but you don't know whether you're going to get this or this or this. So you see, from this cloud, from this tail, you can get different heads. That's why even if you type something into Chat GPT, it can give you different answers, you know, for the same question. So, and this is a huge thing. This is how nature works. Nature works from the right side. Nature doesn't work from the left side. And that's why, you know, like studying these basics, like this, you know, the gradient descent algorithms, how it works. So to understand that this is what, you know, like this type of thing, so how it works, just once you see those visuals, say, ah, well, this is okay about coming from the cloud and about expecting different heads, and then whatever head happens, whatever happens at the next optimization phase, I'm going to take the next step. And if the landscape has a certain, has minima, we're going to be moving into those minima within those landscape. And that is fine. That's the process of this health enablement. So, and this is anti-engineering in that sense. But of course, so far, most of the people, they kind of understand this in the engineering terms, what it gives us, how it calculates, and so on. But I look at it from a different perspective, is that if anything, that's a precedent of the right-hand science, right? And it's great news for us because basically, this is what we are. You as a practitioner, this is what you're doing. You're doing the gradient descent, but before you didn't have the name for it. You didn't, you were basically, you were stuck in the dark, right? So you see, each of you had your own individual path. You had to use kind of different, analogies and metaphors, which were given by a particular founder of your school or a person who was your teacher or the ones that you kind of picked up along the way. But at the same time, you always kind of felt inferior because it wasn't a real science. There's no precision there. But the fact is that in the new way, the left science is dead. And the right side science is actually coming in. And we are witnessing this transformation right in front of our eyes, in our own lifetime, right? 2012, the beginning of the AI spring, right? So you see, then, like 2015, these books of the Hidalgo and so on. 2022, this ChatGPT and kind of the whole spring of the whole, the open AI and all blah, 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 right? They talk about all sorts of things, okay? So the Terminator scenarios and the Skynet and whatever else is that, how is it going to bring all sorts of trouble, and whether it's a real, AGI or not the real AGI, forget about it. For us, what's important, this is how we work. And this gives us, instead of kind of each of us individually trying to figure it out again and again and again, and kind of basically, like not being able to systematize and pass it, that gives us this completely new level of legitimacy and the new level of kind of ability to interpret the body on the new terms and start finding the new maps there. And what I'm just kind of showing is that, hey guys, the standard factory model chopped the times, it chopped the clock, because it only takes those parts from the anatomy which are servicing the external meters per second. That's it. That's what it does. It only selects this. And that's why we have this anatomy of which services the factory. Does it exist? Yes, it does. But that's exactly, if you look at the second video, this guy, Grant Sanderson, the 3 blue, 1 brown, he's brilliant. When I was going through this, I was like, okay, this is this. What the fuck is the activation function, right? Because you've got the hidden layers, which is a lot, right? And then you have to get the activation function. Activation function gives you the value function. And then he used this term, saying, we have it, everything, like these things in the hidden layers, and then we have to squeeze it out. And look, for example, look at the practical thing. Last week or whatever, when we talked on Sunday, we said, oh, next Sunday, we're going to have this conversation. You sending me the thing and saying, oh, how to present it. I come up, okay, let's do it in this AI and the fascia, fascia health farms. When was it? Wednesday.
Yes.
I had other things to do. I came from vacation with my daughter and so on. but now I have to think about it. Of course, there are more ideas in my head, like I covered maybe 50 pages with the ideas, but I have to squeeze them because today at 6 o'clock Lisbon time, I have to squeeze everything that is in my head. I have to squeeze it through the narrow channel of the communication for that particular deadline, right? I haven't prepared my slides. I could have done so much better, but this is where there is value. But then through this, there's been, that squeeze into the meters per second, then gives me the feedback from you, right? And it kind of, enables certain things in me. So it feeds back into farm again. So, I squeezed it into that scale, then and that was a back propagation and it went back. It's a very, very helpful format,
Leonid,
Yes.
Leonid, that great guy, a 3 blue, 1 brown, has many, many videos. Which 2 are you?
No, I'm talking, he
suggesting?
has a 4-video series of the introduction to neural networks.
Introduction to neural networks. Thank you. I'm going to look for that link to put in.
Yeah. So this is, this is what it refers to what I'm talking about. I mean, but he has great series, introduction to calculus and so on, which I can only, this is something that you should have had at school.
Leonid, sorry, but it's more than 2 hours now, and
Yes,
most
I'm
people
done. I mean, I have
have-
to do things as well.
Yes, I believe so. As usual, it was amazing, almost overwhelming, the kind of information that you bring and the way you put it. And we are hoping that these many people come to in October when you come to Lisbon to teach in person. I don't know if anyone wants to say something at the end of this amazing talk. If someone has a comment or question, Miguel, you want to add something, or you Leonid, do you want to close up with any?
Actually, you see, if anything, we don't need to squeeze anything, right? So actually, we can happily leave it in the open-ended version, and basically just kind of give ourselves the time to digest and process it. And again, the only thing that look, I would be happy for those who participated here, and if they basically just pass it further through their networks and so on, I'll be happy to receive questions, right? So to receive questions, and the important thing is that not to think of those questions as being too silly, There is no question which is too silly, because again, all of you guys, you have this, significant accumulated experiential capacity when you connect to real people and when you work to real people. And in the current system, that experiential capacity is dramatically undervalued compared to the educational and like degrees and formula and all that stuff, right? And then people are often afraid to ask a question because it sort of would it sound too stupid?
Yeah.
But no, it's absolutely not, and it's absolutely all right to start those basic questions, because we are facing we are just at the beginning of this transformation, right? And all of you are the kind of right side people who were brought through the left side education, and you never really felt it, like this exact sciences and so on. It was kind of, for most of you, were uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Exactly for that purpose, but that what makes you great, and that what makes you fit into the actual new stages which are inevitably coming.
Actually, me and Miguel were talking when we prepared these, and we're saying that the main reason why we stuck with your teachings and with biointegrity teachings in general is that they talk to our experiential. They totally fit and marry with our sensing, what we perceive in our work. So they are very valid to us because of that totally matching with our experiences and the people we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but
Yeah.
again, it's just the point is to not to like do this habitual undervaluing and actually seeing it this way. So, yeah, so that's why I'll be happy to receive questions, and and if at some point we will, like if we get the questions, that if we need to run, whatever sequel to this meeting, that would be. I mean, I would be happy to do that.
Okay, we can arrange that. Can you send your email so where people can send their questions to?
No,
You
but
can
no, let
include
them
it-
send them to you.
Okay, so that they will send us, to me and
Yes.
Miguel, so
Yeah.
that we can send
Yeah.
them to you and
Yeah,
we
because
can
it's a
put them
bad
on
idea
other-
to send things to me directly. That will be guaranteed. Will
Lost.
get into the cloud. Yes. So that's
Okay, so we'll arrange it's a promise. We'll arrange a second round for everyone. If there are questions to be answered and people not afraid to ask them. And I think we are done for now. Miguel, you have something to say?
Yes, I want to thank everyone present, and especially to Leonid for his powerful speech and the empowerment he passed to us.
thank you. See, by next time, I hope I'll fix this stupid Zoom issue.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Espera aí.
Caso você daqui.
Espera aí.